One big question we all have is why are people covering up for Jeffrey Epstein and the entire Epstein files, the saga, Donald Trump covering for him after running on, we'll release the Epstein files. People want that transparency, and we're not getting any of it. Why is that? Many of us suspect that people are compromised, that Epstein, the entire operation was in fact a intel blackmail operation, and perhaps there's just a lot of people really compromised. Or maybe people just cover for powerful people for whatever other reason they have. Joining me today is Sarah Klein. She's an attorney who's been on the front lines of exposing powerful predators and the institutions that cover for them. She represents victims. And Sarah herself was the first known victim of Larry Nasser, the Olympic gymnastics doctor, and helped take down not just him, but the massive cover up at Michigan State and USA Gymnastics. That experience gives her a really unique perspective on the Epstein scandal because we're not just talking about one man, we're talking about institutions, intelligence agencies, billionaires, and politicians who knew, who looked the other way, and who are still being protected. Sarah, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So a lot of us think, that the cover up for the Epstein scandal is because so many people are compromised. But when I look back at your situation and Larry Nasser, a lot of people covered up for Larry Nasser. I mean, lots of people covered up for him for decades, for a couple of decades. And yet I don't think he was running a blackmail operation. I could be wrong on that. I mean, was
No,
he?
no, I don't think so at all. Nope.
So why do you think people covered up? I think this would help us understand why people are covering up for Epstein today. Why did people cover up for Larry Nasser?
So it was at least a 7-year journey trying to answer that question. And what I've come to in all my cases, not just the Nasser case, is it all boils back to money, power, brand, reputation. And nobody wants to be associated with the serial pedophile. Institutions have a lot of money wrapped up in their brand. And so the minute the brand starts to be tarnished, the brand starts to go south, it affects finances. And I think it really can be that simple, that, our university can't be tarnished by this. We need incoming freshmen. And so let's look the other way, sweep it under the rug, and maybe it will all go away.
So you think that there's maybe just too many powerful people involved with the Epstein scandal that all the other powerful people feel like we have to cover for those other powerful people because then we could be implicated somehow or
Absolutely.
Mm,
Yeah, and nobody wants to be associated with this stuff. So you
yeah,
look at like Larry Nasser's nurses and you're like, what the hell did they have,
right.
to cover what did they have to cover up? And you know, it's they don't want to be affiliated. They don't want to be touched by scandal.
Yeah. It's just hard to understand. I think it's hard for people to understand from every perspective when it comes to these types of cases. And you being an attorney representing victims now, you having been a victim and now representing victims, you understand this probably really well. And I saw this a lot during the Me Too movement. I know it wasn't the same as like to this level for the most part, but it was still, there was a lot of victim blaming. There's a
Yeah.
lot of, so there's a lack of understanding from with the victims, like how could the victims allow themselves to be victimized for so long and not say anything, right? Like people look at the Epstein women, and a lot of them, what I see online. I mean, most people want to see the files. Most people feel like, what the heck's going on here? But there are some that say things like, "Well, this was consensual." They never spoke up, why now? Only because Trump's president, they're trying to take Trump down, or turning it into like the Democrat conspiracy theory, right? Um, but and I saw this during Me Too. It was a lot of well, these women, they didn't need to sleep with their boss. They could have just said no. They could have quit, right? They could have quit. And I think it's really short-sighted. I mean, tell us from your perspective, because I guess people could say the same thing about all of you young women
Yeah.
who were abused by Larry Nasser, right? Which is, I mean, what's the answer to that? Quit the USA Olympics gymnastic team, like quit the team? Like, what's the answer to that? And why should any woman or young girl have to give up her dreams because of some asshole? That's what, because he decided he wanted to enact his sexual fantasies. So why does a woman have to give up, or the child have to give up their dreams or their dream job or their ambitions, all because of this person that came onto him or is assaulting them in some way?
Yeah, I think it's we can separate it into 2 groups. I think when we're talking about minors, that's one thing. The brain of a human being is not fully formed until 25 years old. And in the Nasser cases, it was under the guise of medical treatment. So I'm an Ivy League graduate. I'm a bright person. At 25 years old, I was in law school and I was still going back to Michigan State University to be medically treated by Larry Nasser because I had known him since I was 8. I trusted him. I went to his wedding. I believed him telling me he was helping me.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing. I think when we're talking about instances where it is a little bit more obvious, there's something called grooming. There's something called, your brain being messed with in a way where you honest to God feel like there is no way out. We look at Cassie and the Diddy cases, right? And I saw so much social media about she's a grown woman. She could have just walked away. When all roads in her life led back to one very powerful, wealthy, influential man, I fully understand why she felt like she did not have a way out.
Yeah.
So I think it's much easier to judge from the outside looking in than to be in that situation on an island with the richest man in the world and all of his cronies, thinking to yourself, I don't know how I can get out of here, right?
Right.
And so you're afraid, you have shame. So I think there's a lot of different things at play. It's not as simple as it seems.
Yeah, that's the one thing that really bothers me, I think. I mean, one of the things, there's so many things that bother me about all of this, but one of the things that really bothers me is just the lack of understanding that people have towards the victims themselves. Just like Cassie is a great example of this because she was an adult, a consenting adult the entire time. Reason what's consenting? I mean, but sure, she was an adult, not a minor. She was consenting to the whole thing, and so people look at her and say, "How could she possibly be a victim?" Same thing with a lot of the women in the Me Too movement when, they're just like, "Well, she could have just quit her job," I mean, but it's this, so that aspect of it, and a lot of these Epstein victims, a lot of them were actually over the age of 18. A lot of these women that were abused and treated a certain way, or even the abuse started when they were young. And like you mentioned, still going to Larry Nasser until you're 25 years old. People don't understand that. Like, well, and they tend to stop remembering that this started as a minor. There's a few of these victims that they just see, well, now you're an adult and you've been consenting since you're an adult. So it couldn't have possibly been abuse. I mean, that's almost like what goes on in their mind. They're just like, how could this possibly have been a bad situation or abuse if you're still hanging around this person for so long?
Well, and it's the same thing with cults, right? We look at cults and we're like, I would never do that. I'm smarter than that. I've talked to a lot of cult survivors, the Nexium cult survivors, and so forth. It doesn't start with, surprise, you're going to Epstein Island and you're going to be trafficked, right? It
Right.
starts with, I'm going to help you with your career. Here's a little money. I'm proud of you. I love you. I believe in you, right? And so it's those little tiny steps, and then at some point you wake up, or maybe you don't wake up, and you are that person that you say to yourself, I never would be that. I would never find myself in that situation. It's much easier from the outside looking in to say that. Same thing with domestic violence, right?
Yeah.
We all say, first time somebody hits me, I'm out, until it's you. And it's
Right.
somebody you love, and it's somebody you trust, and it's the father of your kids, or your provider. It's not as simple as, oops, I woke up here and I'm being trafficked, you know?
Yeah.
Lots of layers, lots of layers.
I think, yeah. I just noticed this a lot when the Epstein victims had their press conference, and a lot of the people, I mean, again, most people are in favor of getting the files and all of that, but there are just those few that say things like, "Well, these women, I mean, they got something out of this. They wanted fame, they wanted their careers, they wanted the connection to the power, and that's why they stuck around and did what they did. It's on them. It's their fault for, blaming them, almost like saying, well, they were greedy in some way. And so they deserved the abuse because they were greedy.
Heck no. I mean, that's insane. That's absolutely insane. And every person in this world deserves good mentors, deserves people that they truthfully believe want their best interests, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's ludicrous. I think that just shows an elementary understanding of how this works.
Right.
And powerful people have powerful connections. Who doesn't want somebody who purports to believe in their careers to mentor them and help them out? But that doesn't mean you're signing up to be a victim of crime,
Right.
right?
Right.
Period.
Right. Right, exactly, or to be exploited in some way.
Yeah,
Um, why let's go to the people that protect. So, in your situation with Larry Nasser, there was a slew of people, even nurses, you said, that covered up for him. There were other gymnasts that covered up for him, right? There were gymnasts that, on the team that were saying, like, "Oh," that were vouching for the guy, right? There were, I mean, plenty of powerful people protected him for a really long time. And I don't know, they weren't getting, I mean, they weren't blackmail was there any instance of anybody being blackmailed into it or coerced in any way into protecting him?
absolutely not. But I will say I experienced that myself with some of my teammates when I first came forward, not threatening me overtly, but just blaming me, saying horrible things to me, putting me down, because they don't want the paradigm of their world to explode. And if I come forward and I ring the bell, they're saying, oh no, my judgment about this person might be wrong too. And I think the human psyche just can't handle that sometimes. And so they dig in and go deep for that person until, in the Nasser case, 37,000 images of child pornography are recovered off of his hard drive, right? So the thought that we were saying he was a pedophile wasn't enough. It had to be the images that accompanied the accusations that finally got people to believe us, which is really shocking. But I think when people vouch for these people, it's not necessarily because they say consciously, I'm going to cover up for a pedophile. I think sometimes these people actually believe in that person and
Yeah.
believe that they would do no wrong. And you think about these predators. I work with them all the time. One thing I'll tell you for sure is 9 times out of 10, they're not scary. They're not mean. They're not the guy in a black cape in a dark alley. They can be very wonderful, loving, professional, inspiring, so forth. So it's not always the guy. In fact, oftentimes it's not the profile of the person you think is going to be the perpetrator. And so I think that's collectively a hard thing for people to wrap their minds around too. I saw
Right.
that in the Michael Jackson cases. The number of people that said, not my Michael. And I'm saying, well, were you ever in his bedroom? Did you
Yeah.
ever meet him? Do you know what he does with little kids when you're not watching? You've seen him through a screen your whole life, but you're willing to throw down and send me death threats over that one. So
Yeah, it is crazy with the Larry Nasser case that it took all of those images of child porn in order for people to believe him versus over
yeah,
200 gymnasts,
right,
right? Like,
right.
you have 200 people saying, "The guy was sexually abusing me." And how
Yeah,
do people not believe 230 something people?
because we're
Young
little girls. We're little girls, and because we might be confused, and because don't you
200
know?
of you? I mean, give me a break.
I mean, they tried it. They tried it.
The, when it I mean, I just the covering up of it is so hard to understand, but I think you really paint a good picture when you say these people are, they're you like them, they're warm. Like Larry Nasser, what was he like?
Oh my gosh, I compare him to like a Labrador. Like he was just like kind of goofy, just happy, always had a hug, kind of nerdy, the least scary, intense, just kind of a sweet puppy. Always had a hug, always had a kind word, would always show up for you when he said he would. And so that's part of the psychological warfare that goes on with these people, where I'm sure Jeffrey Epstein, I hear him, described as very charismatic. He walks in a room and you feel the energy, right? Like there can be, and this is another sort of psychological thing to keep in mind, positive attributes within an evil person. The
Right.
two things can coexist at the same time. And I think
They almost have to.
they have to, or they wouldn't have made it that far. They
Right.
wouldn't be
They wouldn't
serial
get the
predators.
following. They wouldn't have people wanting to be around them. They wouldn't be able to abuse people if they weren't
No,
charismatic.
no, and they wouldn't have the Ghislaine Maxwell doing whatever, the heck he told her to do, right? The soldiers around them. So I think that's also hard for people to understand, is trying to paint somebody as all good and all bad.
Yeah.
That's not how you become a serial predator. That's how, you might get caught after the first time. The evil guy in the alley gets caught,
Right.
time number one. People that do it for decades upon decades upon decades upon decades, um, there are attributes within them that people could describe as redeeming
I
in
think
some
that's
way.
why people like victims don't wanna come forward. The brave ones that do, it's great that they do, but there's a lot that don't. I don't even know what the percentage of those that come. I'm sure it's really small, though, the percentage that actually come forward versus who've actually been abused by these people. And a lot of it, I think the victims sit there and think, "Yeah, but, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this person was a good person," because of all these other attributes that you're mentioning. If he was like a Labrador, then everybody, then I could see a victim sitting there thinking, "Well, do I really wanna, he's a nice guy. He's got a family, a lot of people love him. Like, I don't wanna, he just did this bad thing, but was it really that bad?" I think victims kinda go through this mental game in their heads, and ultimately a lot of them come to the conclusion of, well, and I think probably for a lot of these powerful people that are involved in the Epstein scandal, a lot of people, victims who've maybe been victimized by, let's say, or I'm just gonna say like Bill Clinton, right? There's accusations against Bill Clinton. Well, what we know about him is he's a really charismatic guy, right?
Yeah.
People love him. He's got charm. I'm not saying, that he is definitely somebody who abused anybody. I'm not saying that, but I'm just using him as an example of a very charming person. And he's had these accusations lobbed against him. And so if it's true, if these accusations are true, you could understand why, especially a former president of the United States, why victims would not come forward and say, "Yeah, I was one of his particular victims. I was one of the girls that was used to entertain him on the island, or on Lolita Express or whatever." I could see where a lot of, they think, "Well, he's a nice guy, charismatic. Yes, he did these bad things to me, but he was nice about it." I mean,
Mhm.
especially, right? Especially when they're nice about it.
Mhm.
Um, I could see where a lot of victims wouldn't wanna come forward, but also just what happens to the victims. I mean, what happened to all of you? Was there any sort of pressure against you? I mean, not just the other gymnasts and some of that, but, tell us about the pressure you received when you started coming out. I mean, we saw Virginia Giuffre now kill herself. I mean, and the members of her family, people close to her, they blame, they do believe she killed herself. They don't think there was some sort of conspiracy against that. They don't think she was killed, but they do think that the pressure and all of the hate and all of that is what caused her to spiral to that point.
Yep, I agree. I've always said, the abuse in and of itself was horrific. The coming forward publicly piece of it, and then fighting tooth and nail for years against the institutions who covered this up and enabled the predator, was almost a second level of abuse. I felt so exposed. It was some of the very, very worst years. We go to court, everybody sees us on the TV, and then you think they go off into the sunset and live happily ever after. I mean, for me, that's where things really started to go downhill. You're so exposed, you feel so vulnerable, you have the internet mouthing off nonstop, judging you about what you look like, about victim blaming and shaming. You're going up against these big, huge entities, and you're just one voice, and they're telling you essentially you're wrong. The one thing I can really relate to with these Epstein victims is the need to figure out how this happened, the need to figure out what the pieces of the puzzle were so that you can sort of piece that back together and put yourself back together. Knowing that it happened, yes, we know it happened. How the heck did this happen? Who looked the other way? Did what when? That was the piece that really, really caused me to suffer immensely, to lose sleep over it. I'm a mother of two little girls. And so, those intervening years were extremely difficult, and I feel for Virginia's family deeply and for her sister survivors, but unfortunately it's something I see happen all too often. And with clients, they go through the whole legal process, they get access to justice, there's a positive outcome, and you think, oh, great, good, now go live happily ever after. That's not how it works. You're still left with yourself at the end of the day, and you're still trying to put the pieces back together. And I see all too often cases like hers that end in really, really horrifying ways.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, about the repercussions for the victims, because I think a lot of people don't come forward because they don't see the happily ever after, and I think for good reason, because I don't know if there is one. When I look at the women that during the Me Too movement, for example, a lot of the women were just as ruined as the men were. We see that a lot. The accusers, well, we see this all the time against powerful people, right? When accusers come forward against powerful people, what happens to the accusers? I mean, they get dragged. It's like they're going through trial. People bring up every single questionable aspect of their character, every single questionable aspect of their past to try to delegitimize them, and they're left often ruined. And so I think that also makes it to where people don't want to come forward because it's like, what do you have to gain? I mean, that's a legitimate question to ask. Like, what do with all of these powerful people that with like, for example, with the Epstein files, I mean, you've only got a handful of people in Congress. You've got Ro Khanna, Thomas Massey, and Marjorie Taylor Greene standing up saying, "Hey, we want the files," right? Like, we this is ridiculous. Like, our country's been taken over. And what kind of thanks do they get? I mean, they could potentially be primaried. They're potentially going to lose their positions. There's like everything to lose and almost nothing to gain from coming forward. And I think a lot of women, a lot of victims see this and they just think, I am just going to keep my mouth shut because I have a decent life now and I don't want to I don't even want to, and I'm sure a lot of the powerful people that know about the Epstein scandal, they were involved in some way or they witnessed it. Maybe they weren't involved directly so they're not implicated, but they have information that they could share and they choose not to. It's because they don't want I mean, what is there to gain?
Right. And that's exactly what happened to me. I said, I'm not getting involved. I have a career. I was a professional already. I had a child. But I saw factually misinformation coming out, and I felt like I had to give them a bigger picture. What do they have to gain? It's so funny because the uneducated public would say they're just in it for the money, and that's what I hear all the time. And what people don't realize is, like you said, the cost, the death of 1,000 cuts of putting your life out there publicly in these ways is really, really high. What I can say I've seen my clients gain and what I've gained out of it is a voice that I feel like changes things for the better. And I feel like, it's pretty obvious now. We're looking at churches, we're looking at, sports organizations, we're looking at politics, we're looking at Hollywood, and these industries, and we're seeing that this has been going on basically forever, and it didn't get any footing in starting to end or be held to account until we came forward.
Yeah.
So for every group that comes forward, for every person that comes forward, um, you're shooting a little warning sign across the bow that you can't do this and get away with this. And so in a way, it's a very selfless act to come forward. Not in a way, it is,
Yeah,
period. A very selfless act to come forward, a very courageous, very brave act to come forward. I'll tell you this, nobody wants to be famous for being a victim of sexual abuse.
right.
I certainly don't. You Google me and that's all you see, come up. That's not the lot I chose in life. That's the hand I was dealt. But if I don't do it for my kids, who else is going to do it? If these Epstein women don't do it, for the next generation, who else is going to do it? But it does come at a high cost. I will say that.
Yeah. And I think that's what people see, and they just watch these women get dragged through the mud. I mean, it's like every single victim that comes forward, and, and there's a somewhat of a I mean, surely there are people that are wrongfully accused, and we saw this a lot during Me Too as well. There was a lot of people that were accused ridiculously,
Hmm.
of things, of just a bad date, or, I have one friend that got Me Too just for being the manager of a guy who did something and not reacting, even though he personally didn't do anything, it was like he didn't react fast enough to the person who was doing something, and I guess, so there was a lot of, like, this kind of auxiliary, that made people kind of skeptical, and then they really started to scrutinize the people that coming
Yeah.
forward, right? And then the victims really got under the microscope by the world looking at them. And we see this with a lot of these. I mean, luckily we're not seeing it as much with the Epstein victims right now. I think we're seeing, because most of the people are on the side of the victims saying thinking, yeah, we know this happened. So what's this cover up about? Um I don't know if we're gonna get anything out of this. I mean, what would it take, do you think, from your experience? What's it going to take to get them to actually re I mean, this one, do you think this one's just too big and there's just no way and we're just all hope is lost?
I am a very hopeful person, but I would agree with you that it would be a long road and a tough battle. And if I were a betting woman, I would say I bet they never get this information, which is really, really, really difficult to move on from. We faced the same thing with Michigan State. There were all these documents that they refused to release for 7 or 8 years. And we just kept banging down the door and kept going to the board meetings and, dragging them through the mud on social media. And whenever we finally got them, they were so heavily redacted that we got no answers. So I empathize with that. We went through the same thing, but dealing with a university, I'm sure, is much different than dealing with the president of the United States.
Yeah, and all the other and the past presidents and all the powerful people on
Mhm.
every side of the aisle, and, one more question for you.
Sure.
How do you're an attorney now for victims, you were yourself a victim, and then we hear about all these stories like Epstein and Diddy and all this. How do you not look at everybody like they're just a giant pervert? I mean, honestly, like, do you just think, like, the world is just filled with perverts? Like,
I kind
everybody
of
must
do.
be.
I kind of do. And I'm raising two little girls. And so, like, my daughter's talking about, can I go on a sleepover and can you drop me off here and whatever? And, my answer to her is no. And on bring your daughter to work day, if you want to come to prison with me and find out why you're not getting a cell phone someday, the door is always open, honey. But no, I really do. And what I would say is I find it just so interesting that different groups of people really feel immune to this, right? The folks at the fancy private school, the folks at the country club, the folks here, not in our backyard. This is the safest place on planet Earth. This is a pervasive epidemic. It is happening everywhere. It is
Mhm.
happening in your community. It is happening in your backyard. And likely it's somebody that you trust, that you love, that you would claim could never hurt a fly.
Yeah.
So I do have my guard up at all times. Nobody's off limit. But again, as I said, I am a hopeful person. I see tremendous stories of healing, and I do see things moving in the right direction, though it is sometimes a couple steps forward and a couple steps back.
Well, let's hope we get some steps forward on this one, but I
Yeah.
also doubt at this point with all the roadblocks we're getting that we're gonna get any information when it comes to the Epstein files, but Um, Sarah Klein, thank you so much for being here and giving us your perspective on this and kind of giving us some insight. I think it's good to, like I said in the beginning, to remember that there were, the Larry Nasser case, I think is a really, and there's others as well. I mean, even Bill Cosby was like another one where we saw a cover up and there wasn't a blackmail scheme attached to it. There is just, because so many of us, like I said, look at the Epstein thing and think, man, all these people just must be compromised. But it's not necessarily the case. I mean, they could just be covering up because people cover up for powerful people and they just cover these things up. And we have a whole history of this happening, of just
Yeah.
covering up.
Yep.
So thank you so much for being here. Is there anywhere people could go to learn more or support victims, or where should people go?
My law firm is called Manley Stewart and Finaldi. It's manleystewart.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Sarah with an HG Klein, Klein. Lots of resources, a great podcast talking about these issues. And if anybody has any personal questions, send me a message. I'll always get back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. It is free for you to watch. Again, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, KimIversonShow.com. See you there.